For 15 years, I, Eliza Pierce, age 39, funneled a piece of my soul to my husband's family, $2,500 every single month, without fail. My husband, Leo, and I were told this was the cost of saving his younger brother's life. They claimed Nathan was dying, a fragile heart ticking down to its final beat, with no hope unless we stepped in. So we did. My career as a cybersecurity analyst and Leo's as a university lecturer provided just enough for us to scrape by, living on a shoestring budget while we poured every spare dollar into their hands. We skipped anniversaries, postponed dreams of travel, and ate more cheap meals than I can count. I believed them because Leo believed them. I trusted them because he trusted them. Until that one family dinner. They raised their crystal glasses, toasting Arthur and Helen, my in-laws, for their selfless, tireless sacrifice in caring for Nathan. I forced a smile, but a cold dread twisted in my stomach, because I'd already seen it all. Just an hour before, I'd driven past the sprawling Bellevue mansion with its pristine lawn, the two gleaming SUVs in the circular driveway, and I had seen Nathan himself, laughing and tossing a football, not a single trace of illness on his vibrant, healthy frame. They thought I was oblivious, the fool who would keep paying for their lavish lifestyle indefinitely. Their smug voices dripped with a sickening pride as they toasted their own supposed heroism, subtly mocking our faith in them. I didn't shout. I didn't let a single tear fall. I simply lifted my glass, looked my mother-in-law, Helen, directly in the eye and said, "All lies have an expiration date, and yours just passed." The clinking of cutlery stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, fell over the opulent dining room. Helen's face froze, a perfect mask of shock. They had absolutely no idea that I had already spent months uncovering their intricate deception. I didn't need to argue. I just smiled, a small, knowing curve of my lips, and I pressed one button. A single deliberate tap on my phone screen sent an email that would unravel everything they had built. What happened next? Let's just say their world crumbled into dust, and I never once looked back. Have you ever been so profoundly betrayed by the ones you trusted most? Drop a comment below with your story. Where did it happen, and how did you finally uncover the truth? Hit that like button if family secrets make your blood boil, and share this video to see just how far this disgusting lie went. Stick around. You won't believe what they were hiding. In a quiet, leafy neighborhood in Bellevue, a 10-year-old Leo Pierce stood silently at the living room window, a ghost in his own home. He watched his father, Arthur Vance, a stern, imposing bank manager of 50 with prematurely silvered hair and eyes that missed nothing, heap praise and affection on his younger brother. Nathan Vance, his 8-year-old son from his second marriage, was the center of Arthur's universe. He was showered with brand new bicycles, expensive baseball gear, and a level of adoration Leo could only dream of. Meanwhile, Leo, the quiet, observant child from Arthur's failed first marriage, received little more than hand-me-down clothes and cold, dismissive stares. He learned a harsh lesson early on. He was the inconvenient reminder, the mistake his father wished he could erase. Helen Vance, 48, Leo's stepmother, was an elegant woman who moved with a practiced grace. Her smile was gentle, but it never quite reached her eyes, at least not for him. She made a show of kindness, a light pat on the shoulder here, a polite, "Have you eaten yet, dear?" There. But her real, unconditional affection was a fortress reserved exclusively for Nathan, the son she had carried and raised. Leo felt the difference with a constant, quiet ache in his chest, the perpetual feeling of being a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Arthur's favoritism was a blunt instrument, not a subtle slight. When Nathan produced a crude crayon scribble, Arthur would pin it to the refrigerator with a flourish, boasting to any neighbor who would listen, "My boy's a genius," a true artist. Yet when Leo brought home a report card filled with straight A's, The only response was a muttered, "Keep it up," without Arthur even looking up from his newspaper. At 12, Leo poured his heart into building a detailed model rocket for the school science fair, spending weeks perfecting every fin and decal. Arthur never showed up. He was, of course, busy coaching Nathan's Little League team. Helen offered a cursory, "That's nice, Leo," at the second-place trophy, but her gaze was already drifting toward the door, waiting for her own son to return with his muddy cleats. Leo learned to swallow his hurt, to pack it down deep inside, and he swore to himself that one day he would prove his worth. By 16, Leo had buried himself in academics. He was a model student, earning top grades, captaining the debate club, and doing absolutely everything he could to be exceptional, to be noticed. But one summer evening, he overheard Arthur telling a neighbor over the backyard fence, "Nathan, he's the real star of this family. Got that natural charisma. He'll go far." The words were a physical blow, tightening in his chest until it was hard to breathe. Yet he just kept pushing, fueled by a desperate need for a single crumb of approval. At 18, his hard work paid off. He earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Portland. Arthur didn't congratulate him. His only question was, "So when are you going to have time to help Nathan with his college applications?" It was Helen who packed him a small lunch for the long bus ride, her only tangible gesture of care, but even that felt hollow, like an obligation she was checking off a list. In Portland, a world away from the suffocating atmosphere of Bellevue, Leo met me, Eliza Pierce. I was a 20-year-old computer science student with a sharp tongue, even sharper eyes, and a knack for seeing through people's facades. We bonded during late-night study sessions in the cavernous university library, sharing cheap coffee and the stories of our lives. Leo, hesitant at first, eventually told me everything about growing up in Bellevue, about the immense shadow Nathan cast over his entire existence. I listened, my jaw tightening with every story of casual cruelty and blatant favoritism. "Your father isn't just unfair, Leo," I said firmly, my hand covering his. "He's blind. You are so much more than what he sees." My words, simple as they were, seemed to spark a quiet rebellion in him. With me, he wasn't the forgotten son. I understood the invisible burden he carried, that relentless, exhausting need to prove himself. I encouraged him to forge his own path, to focus on his own ambitions instead of endlessly chasing the mirage of his father's approval. We fell in love, building a partnership fueled by shared goals and mutual respect, though I knew he never fully escaped the ghosts of his past. Years later, when a 15-year-old Nathan was starting high school, Arthur would call, not to ask about Leo's life or career, but for advice on how to best position his rising star for athletic scholarships. Leo would clench his teeth, the old wounds aching, but he would still offer guidance, hoping for that elusive shred of respect. Helen would follow up with a thank you card, the cursive perfect, signed, "Love, Mom," though it felt as personal as a bank statement. A few years after that, as Leo and I prepared to get married, Arthur appeared at our small Portland apartment unexpectedly. He patted his son on the shoulder, a rare gesture of physical contact, and said, "You've done well." But he spent the entire rest of the visit talking about Nathan's new baseball scholarship and his promising future. I watched them, my eyes narrowing, observing the practice dynamic. As they were leaving, I pulled Leo aside and whispered, "Your brother isn't better than you. Don't ever let them define who you are." Leo just nodded, but I saw the flicker of old pain in his eyes. He wanted so badly to believe he could break free, but the chains of his childhood were long and heavy. Back in Bellevue, Leo's visits became less frequent. The phone calls from Arthur were always, inevitably, about Nathan, his games, his grades, his social life, his victories. Still, whenever his family claimed to be in financial trouble, Leo sent money without hesitation, believing it was his duty as the older, more responsible brother. But deep inside him, a quiet, mournful question festered. a question I could see in his eyes late at night. Would he ever, finally, be enough for his father? In our small rented apartment in Portland, I stared at the numbers on our banking app, a familiar sense of anxiety creeping in. I was a cybersecurity analyst working long hours, and Leo was a history lecturer, grading papers late into the night. We lived paycheck to paycheck, our entire financial reality shaped by a single unwavering commitment, sending $2,500 every month to his family in Bellevue. The story, as we understood it, was that his younger brother, Nathan, was battling a debilitating heart condition, surviving only because of a cocktail of expensive experimental treatments our money was funding. We never questioned it. Family was family, and for Leo, this was a sacred duty. Our home was a testament to our sacrifice. The furniture was a collection of secondhand finds. Our couch had a permanent creak, and our walls were mostly bare. Date nights were a slice of takeout pizza on a Friday, not a table at a nice restaurant. Vacations were a fantasy, replaced by extra freelance coding projects for me and summer school teaching for Leo. I remember once I found the perfect little house for sale in a quiet Portland suburb. It had a small yard and a big window in the kitchen. It was perfect for starting the family we dreamed of. I showed Leo the online listing, my eyes full of a hope that felt almost dangerous. He stared at the screen for a long time, his expression a mixture of longing and sorrow. Then he slowly shook his head. "Nathan needs us, Eli," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. The house remained just a picture on my phone, a ghost of a life we had willingly deferred to keep his brother alive. Arthur called often, his tone always a carefully calibrated mix of urgency and gratitude, giving us updates on Nathan's supposed hospital stays and setbacks. Helen would send these perfectly penned thank you notes, filled with praise for our incredible generosity and her son's bravery. I would read each one, tracing the elegant script, but something always felt off. The letters were too polished, the emotional language too generic, as if copied from a template. A seed of doubt, tiny and unwelcome, began to sprout. Then one evening, while I was sorting through our shared email account, I found a direct message from Nathan. It was brief, a hastily written request for another payment for emergency meds. What caught my eye was the sender's address. It looked official at a glance, but the hospital domain name was slightly misspelled, a classic phishing tactic. I frowned, a cold knot forming in my gut. I didn't say anything to Leo. I couldn't. His loyalty to his family was the bedrock of his identity. Challenging it felt like challenging him. But the doubt was there, and it began to take root. I started paying closer attention. Leo handled most of the calls, his posture stoic as he listened to his father describe Nathan's latest crisis. I once overheard a snippet of a call, catching the way Arthur's voice instantly shifted, becoming more guarded and formal the moment he realized I had entered the room. "Everything okay?" I asked Leo later, keeping my tone light and casual. He just shrugged, his eyes avoiding mine. "They're just worried about my brother," he said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. I quietly began a new routine. I started saving copies of all the emails, creating a separate encrypted folder. I noted the small inconsistencies, dates of procedures that didn't align with the payment requests, vague medical terms that a quick search revealed to be meaningless jargon. I still didn't push Leo. I knew how deeply he was invested in the narrative of being the savior, the one his family could finally rely on. His sacrifice gave him a sense of purpose that his father had always denied him. I loved him for his enormous heart, but I couldn't ignore the cracks that were spiderwebbing through their story. Our sacrifices kept mounting. I turned down a major career-advancing conference in San Diego to cut costs. Leo declined an award dinner from his university, citing financial strain. We stopped talking about the little house, though I'd sometimes catch him late at night, staring at real estate websites on his laptop, his face etched with a profound, unspoken longing. "We're doing the right thing," he would murmur, almost as if trying to convince himself. I would nod, placing a hand on his back, but my own unease was growing into a silent roar. I dug deeper, cross-referencing our bank transfers with the email requests in my secret folder. The sheer volume of money was staggering. Over 15 years, it totaled more than $500,000. Our entire life savings, our future, had been wired directly to Bellevue. One night, I decided to test the waters. "Your father sent another request," I said, holding up my phone to show him the email. "This one is for a new specialist, but the payment is supposed to go to a new account." Leo frowned, his brow furrowing in concentration. "It's probably just a mix-up with the hospital billing," he replied, though his tone was tinged with an uncertainty I hadn't heard before. I didn't argue, but I created a private log, a detailed spreadsheet of every transfer, every date, every email. I wasn't ready to launch an accusation, not yet, but the breaking point was coming. It arrived during a phone call from Helen. Her voice was as warm and syrupy as ever, thanking us for saving her precious boy. But then, she let something slip. She was chattering about their plans for the weekend and mentioned they couldn't wait to take out Nathan's new car for a long drive, before she quickly, clumsily corrected herself, saying she meant a rental car for a family outing. My pulse spiked. A new car? For a man supposedly confined to his bed? I didn't confront her. I just filed the detail away with the rest of my growing mountain of evidence. Leo noticed my silence that night. "You okay?" he asked gently, his hand finding mine in the dark. "Just tired," I lied, my heart aching with the weight of the truth I was carrying. I wasn't just tired. I was furious. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that our routine of work, bills, and the endless draining transfers to Bellevue was about to come to a crashing halt. The truth was closing in, and I was going to be the one to deliver it. The Bellevue sun was a fiery orange, sinking below the horizon as Leo and I arrived for the family dinner. The 3-hour drive from Portland had been mostly silent, a tense, unspoken energy humming between us. Leo's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I adjusted the scarf around my neck, my mind replaying the suspicious emails, Helen's slip of the tongue, the whole sordid puzzle. We stepped out of our modest sedan and were greeted by a sprawling 2-story house with tall white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn. It was a palace, a stark, insulting contrast to our cramped apartment. 2 gleaming, top-of-the-line SUVs sat in the driveway, their chrome winking in the last rays of light. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face a mask of polite neutrality, glancing over at my husband. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a confusion that was quickly curdling into something else. Inside, Arthur welcomed us, his voice booming with a practiced, theatrical warmth that made my skin crawl. Helen was setting the enormous dining table, her smile looking brittle and strained. And then Nathan strode in. Broad-shouldered, tanned, and vibrant, he was casually tossing a football from one hand to the other. Leo froze, his eyes locked on his younger brother, who looked about as terminally ill as a professional athlete. You're doing well," Leo managed, his voice faltering. Nathan grinned, a wide, carefree smile, and clapped him hard on the shoulder. "Never better, man. Never better." My jaw tightened. Every suspicion I'd harbored, every doubt I'd suppressed, now blazed into a white-hot certainty. This was it. Dinner began. The plates were heavy porcelain, stacked with perfectly cooked steak. The wine, an expensive vintage, flowed freely. After a few minutes of stilted small talk, Arthur raised his glass. A toast, he announced, to family unity, and to Helen and I, for our tireless support during Nathan's recovery. Helen nodded demurely, echoing his sentiment. I watched in stunned silence as Nathan laughed, recounting a story about his recent vacation to Mexico. "Must be nice," I murmured, my tone sharp enough to cut glass, but it went completely unnoticed in the chorus of self-congratulation. Leo tried to join the conversation, mentioning a new course he was teaching, but Arthur cut him off mid-sentence to boast about Nathan's latest promotion at his marketing firm. The room felt like it was shrinking, the air thick with their audacious pretense. And then it happened. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "You're still sending those checks, right, Leo?" he asked, his voice dripping with amusement, like a good old fool. Arthur let out a short, sharp chuckle. Helen looked away, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. The blood drained from Leo's face, his fork clattered onto his plate, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a furious drumbeat. I saw it all with perfect, horrifying clarity. The depth of their deceit, the casual ridicule, the absolute betrayal. They had banked on Leo's loyalty, on his lifelong desperation for their approval. They were certain he was too devoted, too broken by them to ever question their lies. My fingers brushed against the cool metal of my phone in my pocket. Inside it, I had a drafted email. It was addressed to the state's Financial Oversight Board, and it contained a meticulously detailed timeline of their scheme, complete with copies of the suspicious emails and bank transfer records. I didn't waver. As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate lava cake, Arthur began bragging about their hard-earned home, gesturing grandly toward the crystal chandelier overhead. Helen chimed in, mentioning a new boat they'd just bought for the lake house, then faltered, catching my steady, unblinking stare. Leo's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and strained. "You said Nathan was dying." Arthur waved a dismissive hand. "Details, details. He's fine now, thanks to us." Nathan snorted into his napkin. "You actually believed all that, didn't you?" The words hit Leo like a physical blow. I could see the devastation wash over him, his hands beginning to shake. That was my cue. I rose from my chair, the legs scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. "Your father's been perfectly clear," I said, my voice calm but carrying an edge of ice. I was speaking to Leo, but my eyes were locked on Arthur. "They've been using us." I then turned to Arthur directly. "Did you really think we wouldn't see through this?" Helen gasped, but Nathan just laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Relax, Eli. It's just family helping family." Leo's breath hitched, his face a mask of pale shock. He had given them everything, 15 years of sacrifice, of deferred dreams, for this, for their amusement. I didn't argue anymore. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. Arthur's confident smile finally flickered, a hint of unease creeping into his eyes as he sensed my resolve. Helen reached out, her voice a desperate stammer. "Eliza, please. Let's just talk about this." But it was far, far too late for talk. I pressed send. The email, packed with irrefutable evidence of their long-running fraud, was gone. The room fell silent again, their faces a gallery of frozen horror. "Lies expire," I said evenly, "and yours just did." Leo looked at me, the shock in his eyes slowly giving way to a dawning, terrible understanding. He pushed his chair back and stood beside me, his voice quiet but steady. "You used me," he said, looking straight at his father. Arthur scoffed, but a flicker of real fear flashed in his eyes. Nathan leaned forward, his arrogance returning. "What are you gonna do, Leo? Cry about it?" I slipped my phone back into my pocket, my expression unreadable. I had set something irreversible in motion. The dinner ended abruptly. Excuses were mumbled as Arthur and Helen mechanically cleared the plates. Nathan shot Leo one last mocking grin before heading upstairs. I took my husband's hand, his fingers cold and limp in mine, and led him to the car. We didn't speak for the entire 3-hour drive back to Portland, the glittering mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just another star in a black, deceptive sky. The truth was out, and with one tap, I had burned their world to the ground. Back in our Portland apartment, I opened my laptop as the first light of dawn streaked the sky. My fingers flew across the keys, the lingering sting of the Bellevue dinner sharpening my focus. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was a woman on a mission. Leo sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, still reeling from the sheer magnitude of his family's betrayal. But I was already several steps ahead, my mind mapping out a strategy to not just expose their lies, but to dismantle them, piece by piece. The email to the oversight board was a declaration of war, but it was only the opening salvo. I needed irrefutable, legally binding proof to ensure Arthur Vance would never scam anyone again. My first call was to Ben Carter, a trusted colleague and a brilliant data analyst with a legendary knack for uncovering hidden patterns in digital chaos. "I need your help, Ben," I said, my voice steady and low. "It's big." Ben, who was as loyal as he was sharp, didn't hesitate. "Send me what you have." We met at a quiet coffee shop, our laptops open, the air buzzing with a focused intensity. I walked him through the whole sordid tale, sharing the folder of suspicious emails I'd been curating for months. Each one was a breadcrumb, and Ben immediately started following the trail. He cross-referenced our bank records with the payment requests. His brow furrowed. "These transfers don't line up, Eliza," he said, pointing to a series of transactions routed to a holding company I'd never heard of, Vance Investments. My pulse quickened. The name was no coincidence. My next step was to bring in a professional. I hired Diane Sharp, a private investigator with a fearsome reputation for cracking complex fraud cases. Diane was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with eyes that seemed to see right through you. She listened to my story without a flicker of expression, her fingers steepled. "Give me a week," she told me, her voice raspy and confident, already pulling up public records from Bellevue on her tablet. A week later, she delivered. Diane had traced Vance Investments to a shell company, its public filings deliberately vague but directly linked to several of Arthur's old associates from his banking days. She found a series of large deposits that perfectly matched the timeline and amounts of Leo's payments, $2,500 a month, funneled into accounts that were then used to purchase properties all across the state. My stomach churned with a cold fury. "Your father-in-law used our sacrifice money to play real estate tycoon," I told Leo that night, my voice tight. He clenched his fists, his knuckles white, but said nothing. Ben uncovered more. He dug up tax filings showing that Vance Investments was the legal owner of the Bellevue mansion, and to my astonishment, a beachfront condo. Diane confirmed that the 2 luxury SUVs in the driveway were leased under the same company name. Not a single dime had come from Arthur's own pocket. "He's been living a 5-star life on your 10-cent budget," Diane said bluntly, handing me a thick stack of documents. The numbers were all there, black and white. Over $500,000 of Leo's hard-earned money, of our shared sacrifices, had been poured into Arthur's fraudulent empire. My resolve hardened into something unbreakable. This wasn't just a family betrayal, it was grand larceny. Leo was struggling to process the information. "My brother." "Nathan knew," he said quietly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I nodded, my eyes fierce. "Your stepmother, too. They were all in on it, Leo. They all played us for fools." I didn't soften the blow. He needed to see the unvarnished, ugly truth. With this mountain of evidence, I contacted Walter Reed, a top lawyer specializing in financial fraud. Walter, a meticulous and driven man, reviewed the entire file Diane and Ben had helped me build. "This is airtight," he said, his glasses perched on his nose as he flipped through Diane's findings. "We can file a civil suit for fraud, unjust enrichment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Arthur Vance won't be able to slip away from this. Together, Walter and I mapped out our legal strategy. The lawsuit would target every single one of Arthur's assets, every property, every vehicle, every account bought with Leo's money." Diane, relentless as ever, dug deeper. She managed to uncover a chain of emails between Arthur and a shady offshore broker, discussing methods for hiding profits from the real estate, investments, Ben flagged a series of transactions that had clearly bypassed standard tax reporting protocols, adding criminal weight to our civil case. Using my own tech skills, I traced the IP address of the original email Nathan had used. It originated from a public library in Bellevue, confirming it was a fake hospital address created on a burner account specifically to deceive us. Each new discovery was another nail in their coffin. One night, Leo hesitated, the lifetime of conditioning warring with his anger. "They're still my family," he said, his voice finally breaking. I took his hand, my grip firm. "Leo, they chose money over you. They chose a lie over their son. We aren't fighting them. We are fighting for what's right, for what they stole from us." My words seemed to steady him. He took a deep breath, his shoulders straightening, and he nodded. He signed the legal papers Walter had prepared. The lawsuit officially named Arthur, Helen, and Nathan Vance as co-conspirators, accusing them of orchestrating a 15-year scheme to defraud. A surge of cold, clean purpose washed over me. I wasn't just avenging our loss, I was systematically dismantling a corrupt machine built on my husband's pain. Walter warned us that the legal battle wouldn't be quick. "The courts move slowly," he said, "but we've got them cornered. There's no way out." Diane kept tabs on Arthur's movements, reporting back that he had started trying to liquidate assets, a clear sign of panic. I wasn't surprised. My father-in-law was cunning, but he had underestimated me. He had underestimated his son. I sat with Ben and built a detailed, interactive timeline, linking every single payment from our bank account to specific property deeds and vehicle purchases. Diane even managed to interview a former colleague of Arthur's who reluctantly admitted to knowing about the shell company but had been paid a handsome sum to stay silent. The evidence was an avalanche. As a formal court date was set, I felt a fundamental shift in our relationship. I was no longer just Leo's wife. I was his champion, his shield, turning our shared pain into a weapon of justice. And I could see the change in him, too. His quiet, wounded anger was finally hardening into strength. Together, we were ready to face his family in a court of law and tear down the glittering facade they had built on our backs. The truth was no longer a secret. It was our ammunition. On a quiet Tuesday morning, the email I had sent from that dinner table bore fruit. My report to the state's Financial Oversight Board triggered a full-scale, official investigation into Arthur Vance's accounts. Within months, the wheels of justice, though slow, were grinding with relentless force. Authorities moved swiftly, freezing his funds and seizing all assets tied to Vance investments. The Bellevue mansion, with its proud white columns, was boarded up, a stark, "No trespassing" sign hammered into the lawn. The gleaming SUVs vanished from the driveway, repossessed by the state. The beachfront condo in Arthur's portfolio was put up for public auction to pay off preliminary penalties. The entire empire, built on 15 years of our sacrifices, collapsed like a house of cards. Leo and I watched the news unfold from Portland. Our modest apartment, once a symbol of our austerity, now felt like a command center, a place of quiet, unyielding resolve. Walter Reed, our attorney, called us into his office. "The state's got enough to bury them on criminal charges alone," he said, his tone even and professional. "They want to meet, a pretrial negotiation." Leo's jaw tightened, but I simply nodded. "Let them come," I replied, my voice firm. I had sacrificed my dreams for their lie. The least they could do was face me. The meeting took place in Walter's sleek, impersonal office, a high-rise room with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the city. Arthur, Helen, and Nathan arrived looking hollowed out. Arthur's swagger was completely gone, replaced by a hunched, defeated posture that made him look smaller. Helen clutched a crumpled handkerchief, her eyes red and puffy. Nathan, once the cocky, carefree athlete, slouched in his chair, his gaze fixed on the plush carpet, avoiding eye contact at all costs. I sat beside my husband, my back straight, my gaze steady. Walter calmly leafed through a thick binder of documents. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by the rustle of papers and Helen's occasional, choked sob. Arthur spoke first, his voice thin and trembling. "We never meant for it to go this far, Leo," he said, his eyes pleading. "You're my son. We needed help." Leo's eyes narrowed, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. "You didn't need help," he replied, his voice low and sharp as a razor. "You needed my money." Helen's sob turned into a wail, and she reached a trembling hand toward him. "We thought we were protecting Nathan," she stammered. "Protecting him?" I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. "Protecting him from what, Helen? A fake illness? You didn't protect him. You stole from us to spoil him." Nathan shifted uneasily. "It wasn't all lies," he muttered to the floor. I turned my full attention to him, my eyes blazing. "Your brother gave up 15 years of his life for you," I said, my words cutting deep. "He gave up a home. He gave up his future, and you laughed in his face." Nathan flinched as if I'd slapped him, his cheap bravado completely gone. Arthur tried again, desperation clawing at his voice. "We can fix this, Leo. Drop the suit. We'll pay you back. We're family." Leo's expression hardened into granite. "You stopped being my family the moment you called me a fool for believing you," he said, his voice steady and calm. Walter slid a document across the polished mahogany table. It was the deed to the Bellevue mansion, purchased with funds directly traceable to Leo's payments. "You are facing both civil and criminal charges," Walter stated, his tone professional and firm. "Bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. The list is long." Helen gasped, the handkerchief slipping from her limp fingers. "We'll lose everything," she whispered in horror. I didn't blink. "You already did," I said, my voice like steel. Arthur's face twisted, a storm of anger and fear. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You, Eliza, you're tearing this family apart." I didn't flinch. I shot back. "You tore this family apart when you built a throne of lies and put my husband at the foot of it." I turned to Leo. "He built a castle on our sacrifices, Leo. He doesn't get to beg for mercy now." Leo nodded, his resolve absolute. He looked at his father, his stepmother, and his brother, truly seeing them for the first time. "You chose this," he said, his voice final and firm. Nathan's last pathetic plea broke the silence. "Leo, I didn't know it would hurt you this bad," he said, his own voice cracking. Leo met his brother's eyes, the weight of 15 years of deception behind his words. "You knew enough," he said quietly. "You knew enough to take my money and mock me for it." I squeezed Leo's hand, my silent support stronger than any shouted accusation. I had fought for this moment, not just for justice, but for Leo to finally reclaim his worth from the people who had tried to steal it. Walter closed his folder with a quiet snap. "The civil suit moves forward," he announced, "and the state's criminal investigation is entirely separate. You'll be hearing from the district attorney's office soon." Arthur's shoulders slumped, his face ashen. Helen wept openly, but no one moved to comfort her. Nathan just stared at the floor, his hands trembling. The meeting was over. As we drove home, the Portland skyline rising to meet us, Leo finally broke the silence. "I thought I'd feel guilty seeing them like that," he murmured. "I don't." I glanced over at him, my expression softening for the first time that day. "You don't owe them anything, Leo, not even your guilt." The weight of our victory was heavy, but it was ours. Arthur's fraudulent empire was gone, and the truth had finally, blessedly, set us free. 3 years later, a call from a name I hadn't heard in years threatened to pull Leo back into his father's orbit. George Simmons, a former colleague of Arthur's from his banking days, reached out with a grave warning. "He's at it again, Leo," George murmured, his tone heavy. Leo, now 43, felt a familiar cold knot tighten in his stomach. The battle with his father had cost them years and savings, but this time felt different. It wasn't about revenge. It was about preventing someone else from falling into the same trap. Leo met George at a classic diner in downtown Portland, the air thick with the scent of coffee and sizzling bacon. George, a weathered but sharp-eyed man, slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails. Arthur, now stripped of his fortune and credibility, was pitching a dubious real estate deal to a small business owner in Bellevue. He's promising massive returns, using fake contracts and my name to seem legitimate, George explained, his face grim. The guy, a man named Robert, is about to lose his life savings. Leo's jaw clenched. His father hadn't learned a thing. Even in his ruin, he was still a predator, exploiting the trust of good people. He called me as soon as he got in the car. My father's found a new target, he told me, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of it. I didn't hesitate for a second. Then we stop him, I replied firmly. We immediately contacted Diane Sharp. As precise and efficient as ever, she agreed to look into Arthur's latest operation. He's slippery, she said over the phone, but not invisible. Her keyboard clicked in the background as she was already pulling up public records. It didn't take her long. Diane uncovered a trail of forged documents. Arthur had established a new LLC, Simmons Holdings, using George's name without his knowledge or permission to lend it an air of legitimacy. The contracts he'd shown Robert promised a significant stake in a non-existent commercial development project. This time, it was Leo who felt the surge of cold, protective anger. He is not destroying another life. Not on my watch, he told me, his eyes fierce. I put my hand on his and we were a team, just like before. We'll end this, I said. We moved quickly. Diane traced Arthur's emails to a small, rented office space in Bellevue. George provided inside details, recalling the specific manipulative language and charming tactics Arthur used to mask his deceit. He tried to rope me into it months ago, George admitted, shamefaced. I walked away, but this Robert fellow is too trusting. Together, Leo and Diane compiled a new dossier of evidence: the fake contracts, the forged signatures, and bank transfer requests to a new offshore account. The scheme was smaller, more desperate, but just as cruel. This time, Leo took the lead. He personally contacted the state's Financial Oversight Board, the same body I had emailed 3 years prior. He filed a detailed report, attaching Diane's findings and George's sworn testimony. My father, Arthur Vance, is committing fraud again, he wrote, choosing each word with deliberate, newfound strength. Diane followed up with a direct call to Robert, the potential victim, gently but firmly warning him about the scam. Don't sign anything. Don't transfer any money, she urged. Robert, shaken but profoundly grateful, backed out of the deal immediately. Leo felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a sense of closure that the first victory hadn't quite provided. He hadn't just avenged his own pain, he had actively saved someone else from it. The authorities, already familiar with Arthur's name, acted swiftly. His new company was shut down before it ever really began, its accounts frozen. His access to financial systems was permanently revoked, effectively blacklisting him. Diane confirmed the news, her tone calm but satisfied. He's got no leverage left. He's done. Leo finally exhaled, his resolve unbroken. This wasn't vengeance, it was justice. I stood beside him, pride shining in my eyes. You did the right thing, Leo, I said softly, but my voice was filled with a strength that mirrored his. He nodded, a quiet power settling over him. His father's shadow, which had loomed over him his entire life, was finally, truly gone. He had protected a stranger, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his own peace. 10 years after that fateful dinner, Leo stood in the backyard of our Portland home, watching our children play. Our daughter, Sophie, 10, was chasing her 7-year-old brother, Jack, through the grass, their delighted laughter echoing in the late afternoon sun. The modest, comfortable house behind them, bought with years of our own, honest hard work, felt more like a palace than Arthur's mansion ever could. It was a refuge built on truth. Leo, now 50, smiled as I joined him, my hand slipping easily into his. I was 48, and the peace we had fought for had settled deep into my bones. Our lives had been rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. The deep wounds had faded into scars, reminders of a battle won. Leo taught history at the university, and I now led my own cybersecurity startup. My success, a testament to perseverance. We raised Sophie and Jack to value integrity and accountability above all else. You own your mistakes, and you own your choices, Leo told them often, his voice calm but firm. No one else can carry them for you. And I would add, and you never, ever let anyone else decide what you are worth. One evening, a letter with a Bellevue postmark arrived. It was from a hospice nurse, explaining that Arthur, now 75, was gravely ill and was asking to see his son one last time. Leo read the letter quietly, his face unreadable. I watched him, resting a hand on his shoulder, ready to support him no matter what he decided. "Your father's reaching out," I said softly. Leo slowly folded the letter and shook his head, a final quiet certainty in his eyes. "He doesn't get to come back now," he replied, his voice steady. The man who had deceived him, who had tried to hollow him out for profit, no longer had a place in the world we had so carefully built. Leo's decision wasn't driven by lingering anger, but by a profound clarity. He had spent a lifetime mistaking pain for duty. Now he understood that his real duty was to the family in front of him, to Sophie, to Jack, and to me. His duty was to protect the peace he had earned. He mailed a short, respectful reply to the nurse, declining the visit. "I wish him peace," he wrote, "but my journey with him is over." I stood by him, my silent support a testament to our bond. We had fought too hard and come too far to reopen those old, poisoned wounds. Sophie overheard us talking about it one night. "Why don't you want to see Grandpa, Daddy?" she asked, her young face full of genuine curiosity. Leo knelt, meeting her eyes. "Sometimes, honey, people make choices that break trust so badly it can't be fixed," he said gently, "and we get to choose who we let into our lives." Jack, listening nearby, nodded with a 7-year-old's solemn understanding. I added, "The most important thing is that you two will always know who you are. That's a power no one can take from you. Our children were learning the lesson early. Family isn't something you are owed. It's something you build. It's something you earn." Together, Leo and I built a life centered on purpose. We volunteered at a local community center, teaching a course on financial literacy for young adults, hoping to arm them against predators like Arthur. Leo would share parts of his story, not to dwell on the pain, but to show how our choices define us. I mentored young women in the tech industry, encouraging them to be bold and to stand firm against manipulation. Our lives had become a quiet testament to healing through action, not through bitterness or resentment. The letter from Bellevue would cross Leo's mind now and then, but it was like a distant cloud, no longer a storm. He bore no guilt for his father's final ruin. Arthur's illness, his lonely end, was the natural outcome of his own choices, not a burden for Leo to carry. Watching my husband finally embrace that fundamental truth, I felt a wave of deep, abiding pride. Our family was whole, not because of wealth or forced forgiveness, but because we had chosen honesty. We had chosen peace. One night, long after the children were asleep, we sat together on the back porch, looking up at the stars. "We've come so far," I said softly. "We taught Sophie and Jack the one thing your father never learned. That responsibility isn't about what you think you owe other people. It's about owning your own life." Leo nodded, his hand closing tightly around mine. "And that real freedom," he said, "comes from letting go of the people who refuse to." I looked up at the vast, clear night sky, my voice steady. "This story isn't just ours. It's for anyone who's ever been used, for anyone who thinks they have to carry the weight of someone else's lies. You don't. You get to choose your own path. And that, right there, is the greatest power of all.